October's greetings. I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not down to clown, I'm here at Camp October reviewing movies. Thankfully, I'm currently alone at Camp October. My zombie servant Goulash took those annoying campers out on a hiking trip. Now that I think about it, it's been a few days since I've seen them.
Help, please! Help! Help! Please help us!
I'm sure they're fine. In this video, I'll finally be reviewing Terrifier 2. With the third film having recently come out, this was long overdue, I know. I admittedly dragged my feet watching Terrifier 2 despite hearing nothing but good things. It's like the only horror movie I ever see anybody talk about, but I still didn't see the film until just recently. Why? Well, I wasn't really into the first Terrifier or its prototype seen in the short film compilation All Hallows Eve. I didn't hate Terrifier 1, it just wasn't really for me. The gore and set pieces were inventive and cool looking, but it felt to me like the movie surrounding it was like a formality to deliver the gore. It felt like it didn't want to have to write characters. It didn't really want to build suspense, so the movie just treats its narrative as a chore it has to get out of the way to be able to say it's a movie.
This is my daughter, Emily. Say hello to the pretty young lady.
Things happen in it besides folks getting disemboweled, and I do like seeing folks get disemboweled, but I do need a little more than that. If I want to just look at gore, I'll look at footage from the Vietnam War like I usually do when I don't have time for a movie. It felt like with the first movie, Art the Clown was made to be too powerful of a villain, where he's like God dressed up like a scary clown, where the characters clearly have no hope of escaping him or beating him. Nothing is a challenge for him, so the movie ends up losing tension that personally draws me into a horror film. It does admittedly seem like the first film is meant to be a meta-commentary about how the narrative of a horror movie is an illusion. A writer creates these obstacles for the characters to overcome, but what ultimately happens to these characters is decided by the writer who controls the killer and the survivors. It's like playing a game of chess with yourself. It's pointless. You're free to cheat because you're playing against yourself. The survivor girl could overcome and beat the killer, but what if the killer just arbitrarily pulls a gun out that he had the whole time and instantly win? It's like a horror version of kids playing pretend war on the playground. One kid says they have a sword, and then another kid says they have a sword-proof force field and a bazooka. You can't beat that. It's a sort of funny but nihilistic way to look at writing a story.
No, no, no!
But it just wasn't for me. It felt like the movie was just announcing to me that I shouldn't be invested in anything happening. Just sit through these things that happen until there's finally some gore on the screen. I mean, if it feels like the maker of the movie doesn't care about any of this shit, why should I? I'll just fast forward through it until I get to a good part. I also have mixed feelings about the star of the Terrifier franchise, Art the Clown. He's rightfully become a modern horror icon, which is really admirable as an indie film creator-owned character to see Art the Clown everywhere from Funko Pops to memes, to the point where he does feel like, in the best possible way, he's become a horror version of the Minions, and the wordless performance of Art by David Howard Thornton is really entertaining. He brings a sense of fun and joy to this violent, disturbed character. At the same time, I'm not so into the way Art the Clown looks. He doesn't scare me, but there's just something about a clown with a witch nose, a botched facelift, and DSLs that doesn't personally appeal to me. He kind of looks like Jerry Blank from Strangers with Candy and clown makeup.
But my daddy's in a coma!
But the character has a unique, recognizable design that does obviously resonate with a lot of other people. There's a good reason for why he's popular. So despite hearing such good things about Terrifier 2, I still procrastinated over watching it because I was afraid I wouldn't like it, and I'd feel bad about that because everybody else does. But I finally watched Terrifier 2 and I liked it, and I'll give my reasons why in my review of Terrifier 2. But first I have a message from my sponsor, me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday, and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here are the movies I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested in my bonus movie night streams, and I thank you in advance. Terrifier 2 begins in the aftermath of the first movie. Art the Clown comes back to life in the morgue after committing unalive and shows the coroner a magic trick by making the man's eye disappear. Nothing up his sleeve, but there's something up his eye socket, and nothing left in this guy's skull. Art proceeds to go to a laundromat to keep his costume from turning pink, and we find out underneath it he's just naked. No underwear. He just lets it all hang out.
I'm out there, Jerry, and I'm loving every minute of it.
Well, hopefully, unlike his hat, everything else is in proportion. It's in this scene where we meet the little pale girl, who I suppose is Art the Clown's version of the Great Gazoo. A magical little girl that only Art the Clown can see, and like the Great Gazoo, she's also incontinent. Anyway, after washing himself up with a rag on a stick and making a shishka Ben Kingsley, Art ends the cold open of the movie, allowing us to become acquainted a year later with the new heroine of the film, Sienna. Yeah, the main character in this movie is a crayon. Sienna prepares for Halloween by making her costume this year a tribute to her late father, becoming a character he once drew, which was basically Xena but with wings. If this was the 90s, a comic book series that was basically just Xena with wings would get like 100 issues in a movie.
Just finishing up the skull. It looks just like Daddy's character.
Sienna gets some rest, and during her sleep, she dreams she's in a commercial for a clown-themed food truck for people really into DDLG, I guess. Remind me where not to eat.
'Cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe.
Speaking of which, Sienna dreams of another commercial for an Art the Clown breakfast cereal, Silver Shamrock's version of Lucky Charms.
Fries included in every box.
Art eventually makes an appearance in this dream, so I guess he's like Freddy Krueger now. Alright, fine. A Freddy Krueger that does his best impression of angels with filthy souls.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
Blowtorch in hand, Art is all the clowns, but Sienna is all the warrior princesses, and she awakens from her premonition to find the costume she worked so hard on up in flames. She's not the only teen whose sword has made a mess while they were sleeping. It's from here that the enigmatic Art the Clown targets Sienna and anybody she crosses paths with, and it might have been foretold in the prophecies of Sienna's dead father's sketchbook that a warrior angel would rise to face this murderous clown as his true nemesis, which makes about as much sense as a bat being a clown's nemesis. What would a clown's most logical nemesis be in real life? A shower? Terrifier 2 is a huge improvement over the first film for me, ultimately for having a much more well-rounded protagonist in the form of Sienna.
Thanks.
The whole film revolves around her instead of Art. Once Sienna is introduced, every aspect of the narrative branches out from what she does. It keeps the film much more structured to where, even when the movie gets abstract and crazy, it still has the constant of Sienna to keep all of the events grounded, and her story as an ordinary girl who grows over the course of the film into something more extraordinary makes the proceedings compelling when Art isn't on screen.
And all of these ugly things in here? That's not who he was.
And Sienna makes for a proper foil for Art without taking away from what he was in the first movie. He's still this all-powerful fucking clown who can do whatever he wants, but he has a match with Sienna, who finds she has her own special capabilities that makes her as much of a wild card as him. Where she can pull Deus Ex Machina shit out of her own ass, and, you know, there's also the typical unpacking of trauma stuff you see in modern horror movies where her brushes with Art come off as some kind of psychosis to those around her.
Changed medications recently?
Jesus Christ, I'm not crazy!
Even though it's a little conspicuous, there's a creepy clown roaming around that matches the description of a guy who famously killed a bunch of people in the area.
So she had that Miles County survivor on?
But it never really raises any red flags for people until it's too late. The symbolism surrounding Sienna is laid on pretty thick, but it does make her more than just another survivor girl. It feels like she's on more of a mythic level and can stand out as an icon alongside Art the Clown. Art the Clown himself is still very much at the center of the film, but he gives the rest of the narrative some room to breathe while he exists in the margins, taking characters out in the peripheral until it's time for him to finally put the pressure on Sienna. The rest of the cast of Terrifier 2 is, fine.
I don't really know if you can snort this out of an ashtray.
The film tries to be a family drama early on with Sienna's overworked, widowed mother and her edgelord little brother Jonathan, who kind of becomes the film's deuteragonist as he becomes targeted by Art as well. framed for Art's sick gags, and eventually taken hostage by the clown.
At the old carnival, Eric and Sean left me here.
I didn't really care for Jonathan. The actor is good, he's supposed to be a dick, but if he was a nicer kid, it would have raised the stakes for me. But when the movie establishes him as going through a Nazi obsession phase...
Did you know the Nazis used to inject children's eyeballs to see if they would change color?
Jonathan!
It kinda just doesn't give him much of a chance to be a character I'd want to see come through all this, like Sienna, beyond him being a kid and more defenseless. I could have done with less of Sienna's family in the movie. We spend quite a bit of time with them, but it feels like they're purely there to add further complications to Sienna's life when they could have endeared her more to us.
Seeing it on paper and seeing it on your daughter are two different things.
Sienna's school friends managed to be even less interesting than her family. They're just typical stock characters, the goody two-shoes, the bitchy friend, and the bitchy friend's shitty boyfriend. They're all supposed to be in high school, but the movie doesn't really bother to sell that beyond showing a scene of them carrying lunch trays outside of school.
You were up until 4 o'clock in the morning, working on that Halloween costume.
The network surrounding Sienna's narrative is pretty flimsy, but ultimately all of these characters are just here to die in spectacular fashion, and because all the victims are weakly characterized, you don't really care about them dying. You can just focus on their crazy deaths instead of saying, "Oh no, that character died. I really like that character. Aw, man." It does make the building up of suspense or chases leading up to the deaths hard to get excited over, though, because of my apathy towards the supporting cast, but oh well. Like, one of the dudes who gets it really bad is a cashier at a Halloween costume shop we know nothing about. Art just goes fucking sick house on this guy and turns him into a makeshift Halloween decoration.
Let's go.
The character who gets it the worst is the one who would be the survivor girl in a typical 80s slasher flick. She just gets thoroughly fucked up until she becomes the love child of Red Skull and the Crypt Keeper. Art the Clown and the gore are, of course, the highlights of a film like Terrifier 2, and the violence is a work of art that's true to the name of the film's villain. It feels very much like a movie version of a haunted house attraction. There's a DIY aspect to the gore where it isn't realistic, it's over the top. There's a heightened EC Comics quality to the deaths that's very stylized and funny. I heard some reports of people fainting in theaters watching this movie, but I don't know. I think that's definitely the underground marketing hype surrounding these movies. It reminds me when Universal would hire actors in the 30s to go to showings of Frankenstein to scream and run out of the theater, or having pretend nurses nearby in case somebody has a heart attack. It's cool to see this kind of William Castle showmanship today with the marketing, and the gore looks cool, but I can't imagine anybody actually getting as shocked and disgusted by it unless this was your first ever horror movie. I feel like the audience for these movies have been around the block enough to know what they're getting here as a horror flick. Though I guess serving candy out of a woman's hollowed out skull to some kids is kinda gross, but just because it's not very sanitary. I think the only death I really felt bad about was one of the more basic deaths of the film, the mom getting her head blown off. She was kind of a bitch, but she was going through a lot of shit, especially having Jonathan as a son, and we spend a lot of time with her, but she doesn't really get to participate in the movie much.
Your tits are practically popping out.
The only thing I'm really down on with the sequel is a divisive aspect of any movie, but I don't know. Terrifier 2 is really fucking long at nearly 2.5 hours. I like a long movie, but generally slasher movies work a bit better with a tighter runtime, a more relentless pace, and it just seems like Terrifier 2 gets distracted by tangents that don't really matter all that much. I don't really care about Jonathan's subplot, that he gets blamed for fucking with a possum carcass, even if we get a Felissa Rose cameo out of it.
Move it!
There are scenes where it feels like the movie is just reiterating what we already know.
We had a fire last night. My mom put the flames out in time.
Or just total non-scenes where something interesting could have the potential to happen, like the Halloween party sequence where all that happens is Sienna slips some Molly.
I put Molly in your drink.
You have 2 clowns now. You could have them cover more ground and fit some more deaths or wacky shit into the parts where the film starts to drag and really make the long runtime feel necessary. But the movie ultimately felt very slow for me. Stop and start until things ramp up in the climax instead of having momentum gradually build up. The length of the film just feels like a way to make the movie seem epic in scope.
Jonathan!
The climactic confrontation in the final act, though, does make sitting through some of the film's dull stretches worth it, where Art the Clown takes a page from the Joker's Killer Clown playbook, hiding out in an abandoned amusement park where his evil lair is the Terrifier, an elaborate haunted house attraction, a vividly realized extension of the clown himself, brimming with detail. The gore of the film is great, but the set design this time around is also grand. Ultimately, I really enjoyed Terrifier 2, and I'm glad I finally watched it, despite some hesitation after the first film. It feels like a more fully realized Art the Clown movie, and a more well-rounded slasher film. With a character at the center of it I can latch on to when I'm not enjoying the film's creative violence and gore, and the performance of David Howard Thornton as Art. Terrifier 2 is long for a slasher movie, and I feel like it can drag and feel bogged down by some melodramatic scenes involving supporting characters that aren't so interesting, but it really is an entertaining slasher film overall, and one of those rare examples of a horror sequel surpassing the original. I give Terrifier 2 a Chris Jericho cameo and a Felissa Rose cameo.
Cool.
This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.